Thank you for that really amazing and informative presentation. We're going to take on questions now. Anybody with questions or comments? Okay, 1, 2. All right, may we begin with you?
I just wanted to understand, does it mention size of the city? Does it mention that there has to be a stop to the size that certainly Delhi doesn't really follow? Does the model mention anything about that? The other question I had was that we notice a grid-based planning in, let's say, New York or Barcelona, while Delhi has taken an approach of certain roads being much more where you travel more with the car, while the blocks are limited. Just wanted to have a short viewpoint on that.
So you mentioned that there is a lack of urban planning and design. So why is that, despite the fact that we have this town and country planning organization, a couple of other development authorities around for a long time? Is it a lack of planners coming from planning schools? Is it lack of institutions, or what is really the problem?
Taking the last question first, lack of planners. Yes, of course, as I mentioned to you, when we started in 1951, this whole country had only 50 urban planners, 50. As we talk today, there are not more than 5,000 urban planners. There is certainly lack of urban planners, no doubt about it. At the same time, I would say that you do have, the town and country planning department. You do have certain guidelines, UDPFI guidelines, which actually have just recently been revised by the Government of India. First one was in 1995. Now they have been just revised 20 years after. You do have the town and country planning organization, both at the state levels as well as at the national level. But there is a lot more that really needs to be done. And also in terms of, as I said, we were following a certain kind of approach to the planning. But we were following models from the West, zoning itself as a matter of fact. But we have not developed our own models with our own Indian cities. We really need to develop and evolve. So the curriculum really needs to change, with the change situation, with the change scenarios, no doubt on that. And there is a need to do a lot more. There is no doubt there is a growing awareness, but as I said, out of 4,041 cities, only 2,000 cities have got master plans. And if you take 5,000 planners in the city, that means, and 8,000 towns and cities, you don't have even one town planner per city, obviously. There was a question of size of the city. I think if you see the underlying theme, we have really been saying that size of the city matters, because larger the city, possibilities of urbanization economies or agglomeration economies are also more. We are not promoting cities of 2,000 or 5,000 population necessarily, because you will not have enough agglomeration or urbanization economies. So therefore we are not really against, if the cities are becoming bigger, because that also, as a matter of fact, can help in increasing the. Of course, there can also be diseconomies of scale also, as we say in economics. But at the same time, size of the city should not really mean that we are trying to restrict the size of the city beyond a point. Regarding the grid-based planning, the main idea is to improve the connectivity in the city. essentially. My headquarters are in Nairobi. There are 27 types of roads there. But the city is, the movement in the city, the connectivity in the city is the poorest. And that is why we are arguing for some kind of possible grid-based planning, 80 crossings per square kilometer to 120 crossings per square kilometer. That's the kind of idea that we are trying to encourage and promote, saying that at the same time, when you talk of the size of the city, the densities really need to be, reasonably high. We are not talking of densities of, say, Hong Kong with 96,000 per square kilometer, or for that matter New York, 56,000 per square kilometer, but at least 15 to 20,000 per square kilometer densities, so that you are able to have a reasonable amount of, I would say, economies that should really help the city.
Thank you, sir, for the presentation. One of the arguments given for not having a national urban policy by the people within the government and outside is that it's considered that the cities don't have any political leverage when it comes to deciding the policies. So for example, if you're talking about Uttar Pradesh, even though Noida and Lucknow would be driving 50% of the GDP, their obstacles or their issues never get discussed in the Uttar Pradesh elections. So when also that the cities, for example, if there are 100 people living in the city, the politicians know that 30, 40, 50% of them are internally immigrated, and hence their voices do not really matter in terms of getting them back to power. Okay. My question is, this would have been the pattern in probably a US or a Germany as well at some point when the migration from or the transformation from rural to urban economies would have been happening. How do you think those countries were able to overcome this situation and hence were able to really concentrate on urban transformation? Thank you.
My question is, how do you deal with migration when there are economic models that suggest even with the presence of urban unemployment, there is an incentive to migrate to urban areas so long as there is a probability of finding a job. So, do you deal with it in terms of rules and regulations, saying that only a certain number of people can migrate to a city, or is there a way to create incentives and disincentives to limit the number of people?
We are not China. In China, you have a situation of that kind, but even then there is an illegal migration that takes place there. But in a democratic country like ours, perhaps I think those kind of restrictions are really not possible, But what we have really experienced is a very interesting thing. It's a very good question that you have asked. When the Manrega was started, a lot of people moved back to their villages, and the growth of population in the city of Delhi actually came down because of that migration. Rate of increase, rate of growth of population in the city of Delhi came down significantly. It used to be at a point of time almost like 6 lakh increase in every year, which is now coming to almost like 2 lakh to 2 lakh 50,000 basically. When the Manrega, as a matter of fact, was started and the employment possibilities were there, perhaps many of them felt it was much better. So, but I think it's mainly the policies which really help out, but you cannot, in a democratic setup, put up any kind of restrictions of that kind. Coming to the question of national urban policy, my dear friend, I only remember that we had our first housing policy, national housing policy, drafted in 1988. And it took 4 years to place it on the table of the House in Parliament. Right? And we accepted our first national housing policy in 1995. It took almost like 7-8 years. It's a question of, you see, how we try to overcome this, but you have to realize the need for it. There's a need for a national urban policy. You see, I have been working in the urban sector since 1992, when I joined as a director of an institute here, HSMI. And I have seen how the evolution of our urban policies. There were no urban policies in this country at all. There were no schemes, nothing of that kind. Basically, ministries were very weak. It is for the first time when JNNURM started in 2005, and now with several schemes, whether it is Smart Cities program, whether it is Amrut, or it is Swachh Bharat Mission, National Urban Sanitation Policy, National Urban Transport Policy, all these policies, as a matter of fact, have evolved over a period of time. And I am quite sure time is not really far. We are arguing with the government on this account that you need to have a national urban policy per se. And when national housing policy came in existence, several state governments also followed suit. You have Uttar Pradesh government having a state housing policy. You have Madhya Pradesh having state housing policy. Different parties in power, but they thought that they must have their own policies and take the benefit, or politically, or whichever way you look at it. But then they have certainly gone ahead with that. Similarly, need for national urban policy is being felt, and I'm sure the time is not very far. With all these programs now, being there, ultimately they have to be implemented, and these are the stages in which the country passes, no doubt about it, and these are the stages in which actually the countries that you referred, USA or others, also pass through that, and ultimately they evolved and developed a policy, and they are changing also. It's not something, a policy is not a kind of static thing, it also keeps on changing, keeping in view the needs and requirements.
So my question here is a little complex because I would like to step back to the MDGs first. And when we had outlined our MDGs, we clearly had said that the sum population should reduce. And yes, we see a downtrend, but we also know the reason, because of displacement happened throughout cities and they were thrown outside the cities, affecting the shelter, transport, livelihood in there. Now in today's context, when we start setting up smart cities, we think that the ULBs will have full power to deliver, but the 74th Amendment is standing right on their face, and how do they do that? Parallelly, our cities are fairly good models, I still think, because we are still dense, we still have good modal splits, and corrective course actions can be taken into effect sooner. However, poverty, instead of becoming unidimensional, has become multidimensional. So in all of this facts, our entire capacity of capturing data and measuring cities against these is completely not there in our smart city vision. It's again infrastructure centric. So needed to know your comments on that. I fairly know UN Habitat's opinion about the same, because in SDGs there is a clear understanding of what data should be and how data revolution will help, giving everybody a common minimum stand in this. So in our Indian urban agenda, how does that take forward?
No, I think it's a very good point that you have raised. Very especially, I'll mention Government of India in particular is very keen to work out the indicators for each and every 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Currently, the exercise is on under the, I would say that Niti Aayog is also involved in this. Earlier on, it was the Planning Commission and the Ministry of what is that department called, Monitoring and Yes, that's right. They were monitoring the MDGs as such. But currently, each ministry is now working on the particular sustainable development goal with which they are concerned. They are trying to work out their data requirements so that they are able to give those data requirements, and ultimately, after all, you have a national structure which is there. You have the state statistical offices, you have the district level statistical offices. It's a question of indicating our requirements for monitoring purposes, and Government of India is quite seized of this, and that exercise, in which I am also involved with the Ministry of Housing and Urban Poverty Alleviation, as well as with the Ministry of Urban Development and the Ministry of Environment, all these three with which we are working very closely and trying to work out those requirements for close monitoring. And it is the UN Statistical Office which actually is now linked with that, and we are going to indicate which are the indicators which we shall be able to monitor, which we shall not be able to monitor. Not that everything can be monitored, but some of it can be monitored, some of it cannot be monitored. Some of them are indicating qualitatively, some of them are indicating quantitatively. Whatever is quantitatively possible, we are trying to do that. And surely, I think, we also realize that so far as Millennium Development Goals were concerned, there were, I would say, it was a first ever attempt for the world as a whole to do it, but these Sustainable Development Goals, simultaneously there are indicators which are being given, and the quantitative aspects of that are also being, and the governments are involved. And I am very happy to report very particularly that Government of India at this moment is currently fully seized of it, and the exercise is on, working on the indicators. There is also a consultation which is going on with the Central Statistical Organization, with the planning, with the RGI office, and with other organizations of which are really concerned with that. And ministries, for example, in the Ministry of Housing, you have a national building organization, but that's an organization which is monitoring for the entire country, the housing stock, and this housing scenario per se, and also about the slums and squatter settlements. They are doing it. Town and Country Planning Organization has also been using its own resources to monitor that. So, just to illustrate, I'm just saying. So therefore, I would say that these are no doubt initial challenges, but the system will be in place very shortly. By March 2016, the UN Statistical Office, in consultation with all the 193 countries, will be finalizing, the requirements for that and the monitoring mechanisms for that.
So my question is, if you look at the city of Greater Noida, in terms of the infrastructure, what we think of a smart city, it is a smart city. If you look at the design of the street, the open space, about 16% of the open green space, the quality of the water. But even though having the infrastructure of a smart city, there's no population, there's no buzzword of Greater Noida. But if you look at the city of Gurgaon, there's a different picture. So when we are focusing more on the infrastructure side of a smart city, how we actually ensure that that will be a livable city? Because though even having the old kind of infrastructure, the quality of water, the air quality, there is hardly any population.
That's why we argued for densities, So we have to work out the policies which help out, increasing the densities there. You have provided the infrastructure, no doubt about it, but you also have to have policies which help out. There has to be economic activities also so much that, you attract the population. It's important.
Thank you. You mentioned a very important point. While we were not smart, or before we started thinking of smart, were we stupid? I do think so. There are, all over, not just in India, there are insanities of various kinds. And when we plan, we should particularly focus, and 2 or 3 I thought got left out perhaps in terms of Indian cities. what is insane in India, in urban India? Construction going on for decades of roads, public buildings, then communal riots over cricket matches. But what, I don't know if urban planning can think of this, but these are extremely grave, insane issues which need to be perhaps addressed even in planning at the central level. Similarly, rapists not even getting caught. Now, CCTV cameras, obviously, a girl posting some Eve teaser on the Facebook, these are smart solutions. So, these things also need to be perhaps, safety issue, including the health issue, our food chain getting contaminated, water quality and air quality, of course, but the kind of carcinogenics are being used in fruits and vegetable mandis, these also need to be addressed because they may be unconventional urban planning issues, but when we are thinking of smartness in new ways, maybe they can be included. And lastly, I just wanted to mention, our smart cities need not be replicas of Singapore or New York, or what else can we add? Our mohalla life, our festivals. These are our some strong points, sounds about which are missing in the discourse on smart cities that we are hearing. I just wanted to mention.
Thank you very much. Some very good observations. But I would only like to say that, you see, there are almost like 1 million urban settlements in this world. But each settlement is different. You cannot replicate it. Chandrababu Naidu Sahab has actually engaged, Singapore as their consultant for constructing their capital city called Amravati. But Amravati cannot be Singapore. We have been talking of making Mumbai as Shanghai, but can you do it? It's not possible. Every city, every settlement is different culturally. You yourself has mentioned basically in various aspects. So no city can be replicated. Please take it. Every city therefore has to develop its own policies, its own norms. But when you say construction going on, it's mainly because our norms are very weak. We allow the construction to happen and then go back and demolish it. Why so? Why should it happen? Your own norms, your own local governments, your own things have to be really strong, and that's what we said, that rules and regulations have to be as stringent as possible. Right? But surely I think we are a country with very different kind of scenario. We have Kumbh Mela when you have almost like 1 crore of population entering a particular city, 10 million population, going in a city which really cannot really accommodate, but we have to really manage it. So therefore the challenges are very different. So I am not talking of smartness or stupidness of a city. Some of our cities are really very vibrant, but there are issues and challenges which have to be really addressed to make them more livable. I did give you an example of Varanasi, the city which has the most polluted river. But we have to do something about that part, to make the city much more livable.
The government has talked about retrofitting and renewal as two of the options. And that sort of thing actually creates winners and losers. And in any case, whenever you have this kind of renewal and retrofitting, you need sort of strong political actors. And I'm thinking of Peñalosa in Bogota, who was able to to bring about those changes. And I was wondering whether our political framework will, has those kind of actors, or if our political framework is adequate for the task of, bringing about these
That
changes.
is why there is a challenge, which they have actually started, competition among these cities. That's the reason. And I think not only that one time the city will be selected to be included in the list of smart cities, the process which they have really started, not yet completed. We are told by October, the list of 100 will be complete, but only 20 will get the benefit this year, right? But at the same time, as a matter of fact, the political factors, the underlying factors will continue. In the state of Haryana, the city of Gurgaon has not made it, but still they are fighting for it. So those factors will certainly remain, but at the same time, we are trying to bring in as much competition, as possible for the cities to develop and evolve, and that's why they're different kind of model. Although there is a lot of issue that they are saying that special purpose vehicle be created for that, that further weakens the local government. Then SPV will be more powerful than the local government itself. Unless, as a matter of fact, there is a different kind of political will to make either the mayor or somebody else as the CEO of the, SPV. So those political factors will certainly remain, but at the same time, there is an attempt to improve the situation, to make these. There is only one thing which I say, when you talk of smart cities, the idea is to make it more livable. Idea is to provide, kind of features, add features in the city so that it becomes more livable. It becomes more attractive. It raises the value, of the city in many ways, in many big ways. And that is the main objective. To that extent, yes. But since there is a dearth of resources, this area-based development will naturally mean certain pockets will get more benefit than the others.
Dr. Singh, thank you so much for your very interesting presentation. Just to give you a little background of what I do so that I can put the question in a better way, is that I've had the privilege in the past of living in New York for a good amount of time, and then in this other city, which is Paris as well. I'm currently working at the French Embassy in India in the economic service. So what I bring to my question is basically this experience that I had while living abroad and while interacting with the authorities over there, and what I see, of course, back in my own country here, is that all this while what I notice is that there was a huge emphasis in all of these administrations when it comes to the smartness or any sort of plannings of the city on what you call the capacity building. Now, of course, it would be quite wrong for me to put a comparison at this point of time with where they have reached with their capacity building and where we are today. I was, of course, present for the inaugural conference of the Smart City launch, where the Prime Minister was, and when it was all launched, it was quite happy thing to see that we had the entire room filled up with municipal commissioners, with mayors from different cities, something which is a sight which is almost absent in the Indian government's planning when it comes to at least the center. So that was a good positive view at least. But then at the same time, when I had interactions with them, I could see very genuinely, in fact, that these people lack a lot of capacity when it comes to what they were there to attend, which is a subject on smart cities. So in this background, I would invite, sir, your comments on what you think, and from the side of the UN Habitat as well, of what the focus is at this point of time, only in India, plainly, on the capacity building when it comes to the local authorities, when it comes to these people who would truly be executing all these plans and probably play a big role to, create these plans as well when they are sent to the central government for the final stage of selection. Thank you.
No, I think it's a very good, I would say, observation and a question. We have experienced JNNURM as a very good, I would say, exercise. And I did mention that at the outset of the JNNURM launch, the Prime Minister, the then Prime Minister, said that we are putting in upfront $12.5 billion, and these $12.5 billion should leverage an additional $12.5 billion for these 63 cities of India, right? But that became more like a $25 billion program, which was very, excellent, I would say, as a good step for the urban India. But if you see the evaluations of JNNURM, which were there on the Planning Commission's website, now of course in the archive, but they are there, they only indicated they could spend $7 billion for want of capacity. And therefore building the capacity of the cities is one of the most important agenda as part of this program. So the Government of India, while announcing these programs, have not, let us say, announced only this, but have kept certain percentage of money for building the capacity. And it's very important that we build the capacity, but at the same time, it's my personal view, I am not voicing UN Habitat view in this matter. Working in the sector, I strongly feel that there is a need for strengthening the local governments. Unless those local governments are elected bodies, they are answerable to the people, they are accountable to the people. Unless you build their capacity, perhaps I think the delivery will always be a question mark. And that's a gap which I do not know whether the central government is able to fulfill or not, because this is in many ways a state subject. Please remember this. It's a state subject. Urbanization and all these programs basically are state subjects. And only those states where the smart cities are coming, for example, equal amount of money is to be put by the state governments. So there is an equal amount of responsibility for those state governments also to ensure. So therefore, we have to really focus on building the capacity of the cities in this regard. And that capacity is not just the training programs. That capacity building also means the institutional frameworks, legal frameworks, organizational changes that will really be required to fulfill that gap. It's not just training somebody. Training is only one component. Organizational capacity, institutional capacity. I, for example, mentioned to you about the land issue, for example. So far as the land is concerned, the moment you change the agricultural land to urban land, the value increases by 10 times or even more. But are we able to capture that value so that the money goes in the kitty of the local government for this purpose, for the development purpose? It doesn't happen. That's where the capacity is needed, changing the legislation, changing the laws, changing the organizational structure and institutional capacity. It's very important. And if that does not happen, perhaps I think, I will not be able to, I am not predicting anything, but nobody can predict that. But as a matter of fact, the success of the program will always be a question mark.
In the case of Bangalore, sometime back, almost 10-12 years back, there was an attempt made to introduce this reform. And now I think this reform is the one which you are partly talking about. But basically it ended up taking away the powers of the local government. The collections of the local sub-registrar's office, stamp duty basically, had a surcharge, and that was a 2% surcharge. And at a period of time in the last 10-12 years, when there has been a fairly huge boom in the real estate, you can say, it would have created a huge fund but it was deliberately taken away. And
That's a political decision.
it's a decision which is in the context of reforms, where there should be a hard budget constraint for municipal bodies to be able to follow certain reforms, and I'm sure the same will continue even with this government. So even if it is a political decision, I think it was influenced by economic criteria.
So we've seen changes over the past 1 year in the way in which urban programs have been designed and funded from the center. Starting with the announcement with Swachh Bharat in 2014 October, we see a few trends. Number one, the amount of central share has drastically reduced. Number two, they're asking, while it's still a 75-25, if the component, to make up the amount from what the component will actually cost, they're asking for private sector participation. And it is the state's requirement and responsibility to ensure that the state share, private sector share, etc. is made up. Secondly, we also see arguments made by the government that since they have now devolved a greater percentage of central government untied funds to the states, it is their responsibility to take up issues such as urbanization, which, as you pointed out earlier, were on the list. Now, with these and other kinds of trends that are emerging, would you still then, sir, argue for a comprehensive national policy on urbanization, or would it make more sense for the states to develop their own policies which they can then back up with funding that is now available to them?
When I talk of national urban policy, it doesn't mean that you have a national urban policy, so therefore the national government will give more funds. It has nothing to do with that. But principally, if I say national urban policy for urbanization, I basically said, what is it that planner does it? He divides the land into different zones. We are dividing the land in two zones. One, streets and parks, other, buildable area. And the national urban policy has to really focus on how our cities, how our population will be spread over that, basically that. And how funding will come, how will we ensure leveraging of funds for that matter. You really need to, national urban policy has nothing to do with how much fund central government will give. Obviously, if from 32% now states are getting clearly untied fund of 42%, 10% increase, which is a substantial jump, which the state governments have been talking. State governments, after all, have to take on larger responsibility in this regard. There is no doubt about it. And after all, central government also, now you would like to restrict the funding. After all, they would like to control that, to 4.1% or 4.2% of the GDP fiscal deficit. So their own resources are limited. It's not something that resources are unlimited with the national government and therefore they will be able to give it. That resource crunch will always continue, but states as well as the local governments have to learn how to raise more funds and resources in this direction.
Okay, can I suggest that we take a few questions at a time and then, because I'm sure Mr. Singh, you'd be tired as well, it's a long dialogue. So gentlemen at the back, and there, and here. Can we just say the questions and then, yeah.
So my concern is on the hill cities. We have around 500 cities in the Himalayan region. So do we stress upon a different policy for these cities, or should the same approach be applied for these cities?
Can we have the other question?
This was basically, you were talking about cities, smart cities being there to be more livable, and then you also talked about resource crunch. So I was wondering if
And then you also stated that the resources are such that it can only be possible that only a certain section is able to have that kind of livable conditions. So I just wanted to know, what wouldn't the target be more to make it livable in the context of the resources that we have, also in considering that, looking at climate change and all of that, which we know that cities contribute more to climate change and probably will be affected also.
Can you have just one final for this set? Yeah.
Good evening, sir. So my question is regarding the greenfield smart cities. So on one hand, when we are talking about the existential cities and retrofitting them, what would ideally be the logic of developing, greenfield smart cities like GIFT or Dholera on one hand, while we can substantially allocate the resources to existential cities? Second part of the same is, how will they become viable, these greenfield smart cities? And three is that, won't it kind of create a lot more inequity in terms of, on one hand, when we have existential smart cities and there is so much of inequity, we create more such modernized smart cities, advanced cities, but they're like islands of smart cities in middle of rural India.
Okay, I would say that three questions. One, hilly cities, hilly states, very naturally, they are not at par with, for example, the other cities in the plains, etc. Obviously, they will always need special treatment in any case, in any policy. After all, hilly cities, areas, their economy is always very, very different. And in view of that, the treatment of that will also have to be accordingly very different. And it cannot be just the same terms and conditions. Coming to the whole issue of livable cities, smart cities, and the question which this young lady had put it, to be honest with you, in UN Habitat we don't use the word smart cities. We do not. It's mainly in the context of India that we are talking of what a smart city will be like, basically. But we have been pleading for a Goal 11, Sustainable Development Goal 11, which had 4 features. It should be inclusive. When I use the word inclusive, it should be affordable and livable for everyone. Affordable and livable for everyone. It should be safe for everyone. It should be resilient, keeping in view the impact of the climate change, and therefore the policies, the infrastructure has to be developed in a manner that you are able to address those challenges. And above all, it should be sustainable, so that the future generations should inherit I would say that settlements which do remain livable settlements. So we are, as a matter of fact, trying to argue basically that when you develop a city level policies or when you develop a national level policies, keep these features in mind. We are honestly not talking of smart cities. I would also like to mention that this whole concept of greenfield cities that has really come up, it's mainly because cities really need to expand to accommodate the larger urbanization and the immigration or the growth in population. So when you develop the open areas, you develop it more holistically, if I may say so. Have good planning, planning and design, have good financial planning and design. By so doing, it's like, you are constructing a new house and you say, now that I am constructing a new house, I must have all these features. If you have to repair the old house, the things are and considerations are always very different. So it's just like that. So government in any case has decided to give a very kind of special reference to the greenfield developments. But after all, what are these greenfield developments? If you see, they have said If you have a 250-acre plot, vacant plot, you want to develop a kind of, whether you call it a neighborhood or you want to call it township, whatever you name you give it, you bring in all the possible modern features that you can possibly bring it. In that sense, I would say it's a kind of having new cities within the cities. New cities within the cities. But obviously that will always keep on happening, and that has been happening in any case. We developed Dwarka, for example, in the city. I know it's now an old history. When we heard of Dwarka, basically it was a city for 5 million people. Almost like, like that. It was thought like that, and it was developed. And over a period of time, it didn't have water, it didn't have connectivity. Today it has everything, basically. But when it was planned like that only, that it will have all the good features. So therefore, the name Greenfield should not really, really disturb us on that account. But the idea is mainly that you are able to generate employment opportunities within the city, you are able to have good financial planning, but greenfield cities will also be more expensive, much more expensive. That's what it is.
Okay, can we have a final set of questions? Any more questions? Exhausted?
Just about
Okay.
high rises, you wanted to say something? Is that the solution since land acquisition is such a problem? And India has one of the costliest both rural and are we being stupid to not allow high rise on the one hand and not allowing conversion of agriculture?
We do not. This is an old debate, high rise versus low rise, basically. But we are not arguing for and against that. But what we are arguing for is that you must have good open spaces. The features that I have tried to list them out are basically you have to accommodate your population, no doubt. You have to have compact cities, so even if they are high-rise, it doesn't really matter so much. But that concept of tower in the garden is unfortunately no more there. Basically, if you are able to, now if you ask many architects, this is an old debate even within the country. They say you can accommodate densities even in the low-rise. If you can accommodate densities in the low-rise, why go for high-rise? That is the point. Before you close, can I just, okay, yes. Okay, fine, you are welcome.
So how important is the smart city dream as a part of the UN Habitat's urban agenda? Can it be possible to have to have a good city or an inclusive city without it being a smart city?
I was talking to Dr. John Claus, last November when he was here in India. And he said, well, you talk of smart cities or stupid cities, it doesn't matter to me. What matters is the city must be livable. City must be inclusive so that, you make the city for everybody. So you make the city affordable for everybody. You make the city livable for everybody. And you make the city sustainable for everybody. If these features are there, I would say that you can make every place a smart place. Every place becomes a smart place in case, as a matter of fact, you have these features. Think of, basically, after all, it's not that you are only using the technology. Technology will remain, basically that. Broadband will remain, no doubt about it. Today with broadband, life is very difficult for you. For some, life is very difficult without car. But if you have good features of a city where you can, my philosophy is very different. I feel if I can walk, why should not I walk? But there is no walking space. You don't have. I live in the city of Gurgaon, which is called Millennium City. But I call it a disaster. Why it is a disaster? Think of it. I live at a place where the market is at a distance of 1.5 kilometers, but I cannot travel to that market on foot. It's my lifetime ambition to walk to that place. It's not possible without being hit. Believe it. It's not a place, which is walkable. So what is smartness about the city? I was telling some of the friends before entering this room that I am living in Gurgaon for the last 11 years. It's 40% more expensive than the city of Delhi. 40% more expensive than the city of Delhi. How do you compare it? You may call it's a smart city, but it's not.
Not a question, a comment, but not to undercut what my good friend Sardarji has said. Your presentation, sir, 1 hour, 10 minutes, I felt I was in a church or a temple because all that was sounding so great and wonderful. I also come from Gurgaon and he knows what I'm going to talk about. This country and its political will is zero on the word called urbanization. Urbanization for them means paisa hai. और पैसा रोहतक में लगा दो या अब करनाल में लगा दो. Got it? A gentleman here was talking about Bangalore. It was the nicest city in the world. Everybody used to talk about it. I am now 82. I know what it was like once upon a time. The heaps of garbage in Bangalore. Somebody who has told me overseas, I spent half my life overseas. I love my land. I'm back here. One brother is in north part of Canada and the other guy is in London. And they keep telling me to come back. I won't go, and yet I know where I am. It is hell. My wife and I can't walk on the pavement because all the cars are on the pavement, which are tiled. The tiling has been done by the Johnnies on the top. Between the commissioner and the politician, everybody has made a buck. They all know it. The 35 corporators, councillors we have, some of them very good. Nisha ji is one of the best I have ever met and known. She was in prison. Why? Because she was taking photographs of people who are called slum dwellers on land where some big guy wants to have them removed, so the police does that. Got it? We are now interacting in the people's level with the NGOs concerned. How do we handle for the next election next year? And I am the renegade. I tell them, unless you have the CM and the commissioners concerned and the MLAs from that area with you, it will be the repeat of the same story of the previous 5 years. They've had no power. They've had no place to sit in to interact and talk about the kind of things that you've talked. We are living in two different worlds in this country. Gurgaon has some of the best people from India all over. It's actually a melting pot. But deep inside, and I have been interacting for the last 18 years in that city, it could be a fantastic place to be replicated. It's the opposite. Because the legislators will not give up power from the urban areas, they get the money. 47% of the revenue of Haryana comes from Gurgaon. Or the buck goes somewhere else. Doesn't get put in there. This city was never anticipating that it become 2 million. It's on the way to become 5 million. It's a big, nice help for Delhi. The tragedy for us is, this is my opinion, I may be totally wrong. I've been a student of history. I've spent my life with NGOs like American Peace Corps. I was the deputy in India for Peace Corps. And people in India used to say, you are CIA. He doesn't even know what the hell CIA stands for. And I was with UNICEF. And I feel very happy I was with UNICEF because at least I was one of the million who got the polio out for the moment. For the last 4 years now, there is no polio. So I get a sense of satisfaction. But having said all this, I say to myself, when will there be an urban revolution of the kind that the Maoist makes in the rural area? It's coming. Sir, it is coming. Because the political will is so jaundiced that it does not accept their finest people in their cities. Why should, sir, Noida should be the, Noida is beautifully laid out. But you say there are no human beings. Why is that not so? Because the center has no say between UP and Haryana. What is the damn center for then? To fight wars with Pakistan? Something is wrong with us, that there is a view going on in the computerized world, IT. How do we get this IAS out? Some of you must have read about those articles. Nothing is wrong with them. It's the politician who's causing all the damn problem. Life has been made miserable in a beautiful place like Gurgaon, because our political will is zero and minus zero. And perhaps the only way that something can change might come from what I said, not a violent revolution, but the Gandhian type. Let a few die. That something will shake up, because something is in our culture that it says, hey, ye kyun hua? See what is happening to the retirees from the army? One of them is already been taken to hospital. Why do you give a speech to do with, sorry to be digressing like this, but why do you give a speech which talks about same pension or whatever and so on, and then do nothing afterwards? So man, my last bit is, India does not know the spelling of urbanization. Thank you.
I'd really like to thank you, Dr. Singh. It's been one of the most invigorating discussions we've had, and I don't know if you were aware, but chairs had to be brought in from outside because the room was overflowing. So that just goes on to show that while we do not know the spellings, some of us are quite interested, and I hope after that wonderful comment, some of us would actually get into politics more than anything else. So thank you very much. It was a pleasure having you here.
Thank you. I just want to add a couple of things. For those of you who are taking interest in urban issues, currently, at this moment, we in UN Habitat are preparing for the next year's global conference called Habitat 3. If you have heard of Habitat 3, it will be happening from 17th to 20th October in Quito, Ecuador next year. First global event that will be after the Sustainable Development Goals coming into operation. We are therefore working very closely on this issue. Kindly do visit our special website called habitat3 numerical 3.org, and we prepared very recently 22 issue papers. We call them as issue papers. Even there is one on the smart cities also, one paper on smart cities also, but there are 21 others touching on these issues, habitat3.org, and there is a kind of global debate going on through urban dialogues. There are some policy units which are there working, and there is a lot of weekly reporting on the debates and discussions which is there. I am sure you will enjoy, and you can be part and partner in this entire global debate on some of these issues. There is no doubt that the world, as a matter of fact, is not what we inherited and what we are going to leave behind. So therefore, let's try to join hands. No doubt, there is a lack of political will, or there is not, but I think we need to have our own will in this regard to contribute for making our planet much more livable. Thank you so much. It was a great opportunity for me to share these ideas with you. Basically, we have been debating these ideas, discussing these ideas. It's not a final word which I said. I'm sure there are different views, different experiences, and every experience contributes for the success. Thank you so much.
Stuff outside if you want.